before the Titans, chaos, and the first gods. So, let's begin at the very, very start. Not just the start of the story, but the start of everything. And don't worry, this isn't going to be some complicated science lecture about the Big Bang or quantum physics. No equations, no charts, just good old Greek imagination. The Greeks weren't sitting around with telescopes and lab coats. They were sitting around a fire, probably drinking wine, and trying to answer a simple question. Where did all this stuff come from? Their answer was chaos. Now, when we hear the word chaos, we think of traffic jams, or your kitchen after you've tried to just quickly cook something fancy. But for the ancient Greeks, chaos wasn't about messiness. It wasn't a wild storm or a battlefield. It was just nothing. A blank, an empty, endless, silent space. Not really scary, just kind of boring. Imagine staring into a dark closet that never ends. That's chaos. And from this calm, empty void, things started to appear. The Greeks imagined that the universe began to shape itself, little by little, as if the nothingness got bored and decided to make something. The first someone to pop up was Gaia, the Earth. She wasn't a planet floating in space yet. She was the very idea of Earth itself, solid ground, hills, mountains, valleys. Gaia was the one you could walk on, plant crops on, or sleep on when you forgot your blanket. She's the mother of pretty much everything that comes later. Then came Tartarus, which is kind of the opposite of Gaia. If Gaia was the comfortable ground, Tartarus was the pit underneath it all. Think of it as the basement of existence, but instead of boxes and old furniture, it was this dark, scary prison-like place where later on all the defeated gods and monsters would get locked away. You wouldn't want to rent a room there. Let's put it that way. Next came Eros. And no, this wasn't the little winged Cupid with arrows yet. This was a more powerful, cosmic version of love. Not romantic candlelight dinner love, but the force that makes things connect, grow, and create. Without Eros, the universe would just sit around doing nothing. Eros is like the spark that says, all right, let's make some life happen. Then we had Nyx, the goddess of night. Imagine a tall, shadowy figure wrapped in starlight. She brought darkness, but not in a bad way, just in a cozy, time to sleep way. Alongside her came Erebus, the spirit of darkness itself. Together they gave the universe a bit of mood lighting. Before them, it was just blank nothingness. Now there was day and night, shadow and light. So, from one empty void, we suddenly had Earth, the pit, love, night, and darkness. It wasn't exactly a lively party, but it was a start. The Greeks loved telling stories like this, because it made the world around them feel alive. Instead of saying, yeah, rocks are just rocks, they said, no, that's Gaia, the Earth Mother. Be nice to her. Instead of saying, the night is dark, they said, that's Nyx covering the sky with her cloak. It was a way to bring personality to the boring parts of life. Now, these first gods weren't really walking around with human bodies yet. They were more like big, vague powers of nature. You couldn't shake hands with chaos or invite Eros to dinner. They were just forces. But the Greeks told their stories as if these forces were alive, and sooner or later, alive things have families. And this is where things start to get interesting. Gaia, the Earth, felt kind of lonely. She stretched out under the empty sky and thought, well, this is fine, but I could use some company. And so, she brought forth Uranus, the sky. Uranus wasn't the blue, fluffy cloud sky we know today. He was the endless heavens stretched over her. The Greeks pictured him lying on top of Gaia, covering her completely, so that earth and sky were locked together forever. Sounds cozy, right? Well, maybe too cozy. Because together, Gaia and Uranus started having kids. A lot of kids. First came the Titans, the huge, powerful beings who represent the forces of the universe. But before we get to them, we should stay with this first moment, the fact that earth and sky were the original couple, and that everything else, gods, monsters, humans, came from them. The Greeks liked the idea that the world was a big family tree. Earth is the mom, sky is the dad, and everything else is somewhere on the family reunion list. That made life feel connected, even if your uncle was a hundred-handed giant or your cousin was the god of darkness. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. At this point in the story, we've gone from nothingness to a whole cast of primal beings: Chaos, the empty void; Gaia, the earth; Tartarus, the pit below; Eros, the force of love; Nyx, the night; Erebus, the darkness; and finally, Uranus, the sky. Not bad for a universe that started out as nothing. Now, if you're lying in bed listening to this, you can probably imagine how comforting it would be to the ancient Greeks to tell this story at night. Instead of staring up at the stars and wondering what they were, they could say, "That's Uranus, the sky god." Instead of worrying about the dark, they could say, "That's Nyx, the goddess of night." Suddenly the world felt less random, less scary, and more like a story you'd follow. And that's really the point of myths like this. They weren't trying to be scientific, they were trying to be human. People needed stories that explained the world in a way that felt cozy, even if it included scary pits and endless darkness. Soon, these first beings will start giving birth to even stranger characters: giants with 100 hands, creatures with one big eye, and of course, the Titans themselves. But for now, we'll pause here, with Earth and sky resting together, and the universe slowly filling up with characters who will fight, rule, and sometimes get into very awkward family arguments. Because in Greek myth, family drama isn't just part of life, it is life. So, from nothing came something, and from something came everything. The stage is set, the Titans are waiting in the wings, but that's for the next chapter. Gaia and Uranus, the sky meets the earth. So, when we last left things, the universe had just gotten itself organized. Out of nothing chaos we suddenly had Earth Gaia, the pit Tartarus, night Nyx, darkness Erebus, love Eros, and finally, the sky Uranus. Quite a lineup. It's like the world was holding auditions for characters, and the first cast members had already taken their spots. Now, Gaia, the earth, was tired of hanging out alone. She had plenty of personality, plenty of potential, but lying there as the endless ground without anyone to talk to, not the most exciting existence. So, she brought forth Uranus, the sky stretching himself out above her, covering her completely. Together, Gaia and Uranus became the universe's first couple. And if you imagine them as more than just cosmic concepts, you can picture a very clingy relationship. Uranus literally pressed down on Gaia all the time. No space, no personal bubble, just constant togetherness. Romantic, maybe. Comfortable, not really. Still, they made it work, or at least, at first, because soon they had children, and not just one or two, but a whole collection of divine kids, the kind of kids you'd need a very long dinner table for. These were the Titans. The first 12 Titans were Oceanus, who became the god of the endless river, thought to circle the world; Tethys, his sister, connected with fresh water and springs; Hyperion, tied to the sun; Thea, linked to shining light; Cus, representing intelligence and the axis of heaven; Phoebe, his partner, goddess of prophecy; Crius, who was sort of a more mysterious titan; Mnemosyne, the goddess of memory; Themis, goddess of order, law, and justice; Iapetus, who later fathered Prometheus and Epimetheus; Rhea, destined to be the mother of the Olympians; and finally, Kronos, the youngest, who would play the biggest role in the drama to come. 12 Titans, each tied to some cosmic power or principle. It was like Gaia and Uranus had just set up the foundation of reality by giving birth to these beings. But here is the thing, Gaia and Uranus didn't stop there. They also had other children, stranger, less polished ones. There were the Cyclopes, giant beings with only one big eye in the middle of their forehead. Not exactly the kids you'd show off at the town fair, but still important. They were master craftsmen, destined to make weapons and tools for the gods. Then came the Hecatonchires, also known as the 100-handed ones. Imagine enormous beings with 50 heads and 100 arms each. If you're thinking, that sounds inconvenient for buying clothes, you're right. They weren't the cuddliest children, but they were incredibly powerful. Now, Here is where Uranus showed his true colors. Instead of being a proud dad, he was horrified. He looked at the Cyclopes and the 100-handed ones and thought, nope, absolutely not. He found them too ugly, too monstrous, too threatening. So what did he do? He shoved them back inside Gaia. Yes, he literally stuffed his children back into the womb of the earth, burying them deep inside her body. Imagine how uncomfortable that would be for Gaia, carrying around massive, squirming giants inside her, unable to let them out. Naturally, she was not thrilled. This is one of those moments in Greek mythology that reminds us these stories were basically ancient soap operas. You've got a controlling husband, a suffering wife, children trapped in a cosmic basement. It's family drama on a massive scale. Gaia groaned with the pain of her trapped children, and her heart grew angry. She wanted revenge. But how do you get revenge on the literal sky that's pressing down on you 24/7? Well, Gaia came up with a plan. She crafted a sickle made of adamant, a hard, unbreakable material. This was her secret weapon, but she couldn't wield it herself. She needed one of her children to step up. So she gathered the Titans and explained her plan. Someone had to confront Uranus and stop his cruel behavior. Most of the Titans hesitated. It's one thing to complain about your dad, and another to actually go up against him. Uranus was the sky itself, immense, all-covering, powerful. But one Titan wasn't afraid. The youngest, Kronos, stepped forward. He was ambitious, bold, and maybe just a little too eager to take control. He agreed to help his mother. Gaia handed Kronos the sickle, and together they set their trap. One evening, when Uranus came to lie down across Gaia, as he always did, Kronos was waiting. As Uranus settled down, Kronos jumped out with the sickle and struck. He castrated Uranus in one swift, shocking move. The sky god's blood fell to the earth, and from those drops, new beings sprang up like the Furies, goddesses of vengeance, and the giants. And from Uranus' severed part, cast into the sea, rose something even stranger, the goddess Aphrodite, born from the foam. Yes, in this myth, the goddess of beauty and love was born out of a pretty gruesome event. It's one of those details the Greeks told with a straight face, even though it's, well, a little awkward. With Uranus gone, Kronos and the Titans were free. They became the new rulers of the world, with Kronos as their leader. Gaia's plan had worked, but of course, in true Greek mythology fashion, this victory came with consequences. Because every time someone takes power in these stories, there's always a prophecy, a warning, a reminder that one day, their children might do the same to them. But for now, the Titans had won. The sky was no longer crushing the earth. The monstrous children were no longer locked away, at least not yet. And Kronos was holding the sickle, ready to rule. It was the end of Uranus' reign, and the beginning of a new age, the age of the Titans. Kronos and the rebellion. So far, our story has been about beginnings. First there was nothing, then there was chaos, then the first gods, then Gaia and Uranus, and finally, the 12 Titans. We've seen how Uranus, the sky, turned out to be a bit of a controlling dad stuffing his uglier kids back inside Gaia. And we've seen how Gaia, tired of all that, crafted a sickle and convinced her youngest son, Kronos, to do something about it. And wow, did Kronos do something about it? He ambushed Uranus, chopped him up with that sickle, and basically ended his reign as sky ruler forever. From Uranus' blood and his, let's say, lost parts, new beings like the Furies, giants, and Aphrodite were born. And so, a new era began, the age of the Titans. But, as you've probably noticed by now, Greek mythology doesn't really do happily ever after. Every time someone rises to power, there's always a catch. Kronos, the brand new king of the cosmos, was about to learn this the hard way. At first, things looked good for Kronos. He ruled the universe with his fellow Titans. They represented the great forces of nature, sun, moon, rivers, memory, law, time. Everything seemed orderly. It was a golden age, according to the Greeks. Humanity hadn't even arrived yet, but the universe was thriving. Still, Uranus, even in defeat, had one last trick up his sleeve. Before Kronos overthrew him, Uranus gave a prophecy. One day, Kronos' own child would rise up and overthrow him, just as he had done to his father. Now, imagine hearing that right after you've just pulled off the ultimate rebellion. You've defeated your dad, you've claimed the throne, you're feeling unstoppable, and then you get hit with, "Oh, by the way, your kid is totally going to do this to you too." Talk about a mood killer. But Kronos took the prophecy seriously. He'd seen what happened to Uranus. He knew how these things went. Greek myths are basically one long chain of parents and children fighting for the top spot, like some bizarre cosmic talent show, where the winner always gets dethroned by the next contestant. Kronos married his sister, Rhea. Yes, Greek mythology is full of sibling couples. Don't think about it too hard, it was just how the myths worked. Together, they started having children. And this is where Kronos' paranoia really kicked in. Every time Rhea gave birth, Kronos swallowed the baby whole. Not exactly the kind of parenting you'd find in a modern guidebook, but for Kronos, it seemed like the safest way to make sure none of his children grew up to overthrow him. If the kids were inside his stomach, well, problem solved. The first child was Hestia, goddess of the hearth and home. Gulp. Down she went. The second was Demeter, goddess of the harvest. Gulp. Then came Hera, future queen of the gods. Gulp. Hades, lord of the underworld. Gulp. Poseidon, ruler of the seas. Gulp. One by one, each baby was born. And one by one, each baby disappeared into Kronos' bottomless belly. Now, Rhea was heartbroken. Imagine being a mother, giving birth again and again, only to watch your husband eat your children like some kind of horrifying snack. But she was afraid of Kronos, too. He was king of the universe, after all. What could she do? Still, by the time she was pregnant with her sixth child, she couldn't take it anymore. She went to her parents Gaia and Uranus for advice. Despite everything that had happened between them, they were still willing to help their daughter. Together, they came up with a plan. When the baby was born, Rhea secretly hid him away. This was Zeus, the future king of the gods. Instead of handing Zeus over to Kronos, she swaddled a rock in baby clothes and gave that to her husband. Kronos, without checking too closely, swallowed the rock whole, thinking his new child was safely out of the way. Meanwhile, the real baby Zeus was whisked off to the island of Crete. There, in a hidden cave, he was raised in secret. The nymphs cared for him, feeding him milk from the magical goat Amalthea. To make sure Kronos couldn't hear his cries, the Curetes, a band of warriors, danced around the cave, clashing their spears against their shields to cover the noise. It was a very unusual childhood, but it worked. Zeus grew up strong, clever, and determined, and while he was growing, Kronos went on ruling the cosmos, completely unaware that his greatest rival was being raised in secret. Kronos thought he had beaten the prophecy. He thought he had outsmarted fate. But that's the thing about Greek myths, fate is unavoidable. No matter what you do, it finds a way to happen. And Kronos was about to find out that swallowing a rock isn't the same as swallowing your destiny. For now, though, Kronos ruled supreme. He had eaten 5 of his children, was king of the universe, and probably thought he had solved all his problems. The sky no longer pressed down on the earth. The Titans were in charge, and no one dared to challenge him. But far away, in that secret cave in Crete, a baby was growing into a young god, and Zeus was not going to let things stay the way they were. So here we are, at the end of another chapter of this cosmic family drama. Uranus was overthrown by his son, Kronos, and now Kronos has set himself up for the exact same fate, thanks to his paranoia and his habit of swallowing children whole. The stage is set for the next act, the rise of Zeus, the rebellion of the Olympians, and the great war between the old gods and the new. But before we get to that war, we still have to spend a little more time with young Zeus and how he prepared to challenge the king of the Titans. That's for the next chapter. The age of the Titans. So far, we've seen the messy family drama of Uranus and Gaia, the ambitious move by Kronos, and his rather disturbing habit of swallowing his kids like snacks. But let's hit pause on all the rebellion talk for a moment and take a look at what the world was actually like under Titan rule. Because according to the Greeks, there really was a time when the Titans were in charge, and it wasn't all doom and gloom. In fact, they imagined it as something like a golden age. When Kronos cut down his father Uranus and took the throne, the Titans officially became the rulers of the cosmos. Each Titan had their own domain, their own personality, and their own part to play in running the universe. It wasn't just Kronos sitting on a throne while everyone else hung around. They each represented huge cosmic forces, and together, they were the board of directors of existence. Let's meet a few of the most important ones. There was Oceanus, the oldest of the Titans. He didn't rule a little pond or even just the Mediterranean. Oceanus was imagined as the massive, endless river that wrapped all the way around the world. If you looked out at the horizon and saw the sea stretching on forever, the Greeks believed that was Oceanus. He was calm, steady, and important. Without him, the earth would be dry and lifeless. Then came Tethys, his partner, who was linked to fresh waters like rivers, springs, and fountains. Together, Oceanus and Tethys were thought to have thousands of children, river gods, and water nymphs who filled the world with streams and flowing water. Basically, every time the Greeks found a new spring or river, they just said, "Oh, another child of Oceanus and Tethys." There was Hyperion, Titan of the sun, and his sister wife Theia, goddess of shining light. They became parents to Helios, the sun god, Selene the moon, and Eos the dawn. So if you picture sunrise and sunset, the Titans were behind it. Without them, the day-night cycle would have been a bit awkward. Next, there was Mnemosyne, the goddess of memory. She doesn't sound very flashy compared to sun or sea, but memory was hugely important to the Greeks. She later became the mother of the Muses, the 9 goddesses of inspiration who gave humans music, poetry, and storytelling. Without her, the Greeks figured there'd be no art. Then we had Themis, the goddess of law, order, and justice. She represented the idea that the universe should have balance, that things should make sense. Whenever you see a statue of a lady holding scales, that's a later echo of Themis. And of course, there was Iapetus, who doesn't always get the spotlight, but he was the father of Prometheus, Epimetheus, and Atlas, some of the most famous figures in Greek myth. Finally, we come back to Rhea, who married Kronos and tried to build a family, though that didn't go so well, thanks to Kronos' appetite. And of course, there was Kronos himself, the youngest, but the one who dared to overthrow Uranus. He was king of the Titans, ruler of the cosmos, and god of time. He was often pictured with his sickle, a reminder of how he got the throne in the first place. So, what was life like during the reign of Kronos and the Titans? The Greeks pictured it as a golden age. The earth was rich and fertile, crops grew without effort, rivers flowed, animals thrived, and there was peace. Humans, when they eventually arrived, lived simple, happy lives without war, hunger, or suffering. Nobody had to plant crops or build tools. Nature just provided. Basically, it was a dream world. No taxes, no bosses, no alarm clocks, just endless sunshine, full harvests, and cozy evenings. The Titans, with Kronos in charge, presided over this age like a council of cosmic caretakers. It sounds kind of nice, doesn't it? But of course, nothing in Greek myth stays nice for long. Even during this golden age, there were cracks in the picture. Remember the children Kronos had with Rhea? Each time she gave birth, he swallowed the baby whole because of the prophecy that one of them would overthrow him. So while the world outside might have looked golden and perfect, the royal family was a total disaster. The Cyclopes and the 100-handed ones were still locked away in Tartarus, where Uranus had once stuffed them. Kronos, even though he hated Uranus, kept them imprisoned because he didn't want to risk them challenging him. So these powerful beings, who could have been allies, stayed trapped in darkness, and, lurking in the back of Kronos' mind, was that prophecy, the one Uranus had given him before his fall, that one day, a child of Kronos would rise up and do to him what he had done to Uranus. Kronos could never really relax, even in his golden kingdom. His paranoia shaped every choice he made, from swallowing his kids to guarding his throne with iron determination. For the people telling these stories, the ancient Greeks, the age of the Titans, represented a kind of lost paradise. They believed the world had once been perfect and peaceful, but then gradually slipped into decline as new ages came and went. It's a bit like how people today sometimes say, things were better back in the good old days, even if they really weren't. For the Greeks, the reign of Kronos was the ultimate good old days, before Zeus and the Olympians brought in war, struggle, and punishment. But here is the twist: the golden age couldn't last, because fate never lets anyone sit on the throne forever. Just as Uranus fell to Kronos, so too would Kronos eventually fall to someone else. The world had to keep moving, changing, and shifting. That's what made the myths so fascinating. The cycle of generations, one after another, each rising and falling like waves on the sea. So, the age of the Titans was a time of sunshine and plenty, ruled by Kronos and his siblings, each with their own piece of the cosmic puzzle. But beneath that calm surface, a storm was building. Rhea was plotting to save her next child, Zeus. The Cyclopes were still trapped in Tartarus, and fate was sharpening its knives. Soon, that perfect golden age would turn dark, and when it did, the greatest rebellion of all time was about to unfold. But that's a story for the next chapter. Kronos, the paranoid dad. By now, you've probably noticed a pattern in these myths. Someone powerful rises up, takes the throne, and then immediately becomes obsessed with never losing it. Uranus tried to keep his kids buried inside Gaia, because he was afraid of being overthrown. And Kronos, well, he learned that paranoia directly from his dad. The prophecy was clear: one of Kronos' own children would overthrow him, just as he had overthrown Uranus. And Kronos wasn't about to let that happen. He may have been the god of time, but when it came to his family, he acted like the god of bad parenting. Kronos married his sister Rhea because in Greek mythology, family trees are less like trees and more like tangled vines, and together they started having children. At first, it seemed like a happy enough match. Rhea was kind, nurturing, and strong-willed, a perfect balance to Kronos' cold paranoia. She hoped they would raise a new generation of gods to rule alongside them. But as soon as their first child, Hestia, was born, Kronos remembered the prophecy, and he did something unthinkable. He swallowed her, not figuratively, literally. He opened his mouth and gulped down the newborn goddess like she was an appetizer. Just imagine that family dinner conversation. Congratulations, Kronos, it's a girl. Great, yum. It's dark, it's bizarre, but in the myths, that's exactly what happened. Next came Demeter, goddess of the harvest. Once again, Rhea barely had time to hold her daughter before Kronos swallowed her too. Then came Hera, the future queen of the gods. Same fate, swallowed whole. Hades, who would one day rule the underworld, was born next, down the hatch. And then came Poseidon, destined to command the seas. Kronos didn't hesitate, he swallowed him too. 5 children in a row, all devoured by their father. Inside Kronos' stomach, the children were trapped, alive but unable to escape. You'd think the god of time would have learned a little patience, but nope, his paranoia was stronger than his love for his kids. Now, Rhea was devastated. Imagine carrying a child 4 months, only to watch your husband eat them the moment they were born. It broke her heart, but she also felt powerless. Kronos was king of the cosmos. He had the sickle. He had the throne. What could she do? Still, by the time she became pregnant with her 6th child, she decided enough was enough. She couldn't lose another baby. So she went to her parents Gaia and the still defeated Uranus for advice. They helped her come up with a plan. When the time came to give birth, Rhea secretly delivered her baby on the island of Crete, far away from Kronos' watchful eye. The child was Zeus. Instead of handing the baby to Kronos, Rhea swaddled a rock in blankets, making it look like a newborn. She handed the bundle to Kronos, who, without a second thought, swallowed it whole. Problem solved, he thought. No prophecy could touch him now. Meanwhile, the real baby Zeus was hidden away in a cave, safe from his father's hunger. Zeus' childhood was unusual, to say the least. He was raised by nymphs who cared for him and fed him with milk from the divine goat Amalthea. Sometimes the story says Amalthea was an actual goat. Sometimes she was a goat nymph. But either way, she became his foster mother. And because baby Zeus cried like, well, a baby, the Curetes warriors dressed in armor danced around the cave, clashing their spears and shields together to drown out the noise so Kronos wouldn't hear. Basically, they invented heavy metal music thousands of years before guitars. Growing up in secret, Zeus learned strength, cunning, and patience. Unlike his father, who was ruled by fear, Zeus grew up biding his time, waiting for the right moment to strike. Back in Kronos' palace, life went on as usual. He believed he had swallowed all of his children. He believed the prophecy was beaten, and he believed his rule would last forever. But what's funny about fate in Greek mythology is that the harder you try to avoid it, the faster you walk into it. Uranus tried to stop his kids from overthrowing him by locking them away, and Kronos tried to stop his kids by swallowing them whole. In both cases, the parents basically created the conditions that guaranteed their downfall. Inside Kronos' stomach, 5 fully grown gods were trapped, waiting for their chance to be freed. And outside, Zeus was growing into a clever, ambitious young god, ready to rescue his siblings. The prophecy wasn't dead, it was just waiting. The Greeks told this story just to explain the past, but to explore the cycle of power. To them, every ruler eventually falls. No matter how strong they are, time marches forward, children grow up, and nothing stays the same forever. Kronos, ironically the god of time, couldn't escape the very thing he represented. His paranoia about the future was exactly what created it. But to keep things cozy, let's not forget that in this moment of the story, the universe still seemed calm. The Titans were ruling in their golden age. Humans, according to later traditions, lived simple, carefree lives under Kronos. The rivers flowed, the fields grew, and everything looked perfect, at least on the surface. Beneath it all, though, family drama was brewing, and in Greek mythology, family drama is always the most dangerous kind. So, Kronos was a king with a belly full of secrets. Literally, he thought he had secured his throne by swallowing his children, but really, he had created a ticking time bomb inside himself. And thanks to Rhea's clever trick, his youngest son was out there, safe, growing, and getting ready for the day when he would come back and challenge his father. The prophecy was alive. The cycle of rebellion wasn't over. It was only just beginning. But for now, let's leave Kronos sitting on his throne, smug and satisfied, and Zeus tucked away in his hidden cave, waiting for his moment. Because in the next chapter, we'll see how Zeus grew up in secret, raised in hiding, and prepared for the battle that would change the universe forever. The childhood of Zeus. So, while Kronos was busy thinking he had outsmarted fate by swallowing a rock in baby clothes, Zeus was actually alive and well, growing up far away from his paranoid father. His mother, Rhea, had pulled off one of the greatest parenting tricks in mythology, hiding her son while handing her husband a snack disguised as an infant. That's next-level deception, but of course, raising the future king of the gods wasn't simple. Rhea couldn't just leave him on the doorstep of some babysitter. Zeus needed protection, nurturing, and, most importantly, silence, because if Kronos ever found out, the kid was toast. The cave where Zeus grew up is one of those legendary places in Crete, and the Greeks loved to argue over which specific cave it was. Some said Mount Dicte, others said Mount Ida, but whichever cave you imagine, it wasn't a dark, miserable dungeon. Think of it more like a magical hideout, tucked away in the mountains, full of divine caretakers who kept the baby safe. The most famous of his caretakers was Amalthea, a goat, or, depending on the version, a goat nymph. Either way, she fed Zeus her milk, keeping him strong and healthy. The image of the king of the gods being raised on goat's milk is oddly humble. He wasn't spoiled with golden baby bottles or divine applesauce. Nope, just good old goat milk. Later myths say that Amalthea's horn actually became the cornucopia, or horn of plenty, the magical symbol that pours out endless food and drink. Not a bad legacy for a foster goat mom. But goats aside, baby Zeus also needed protection from discovery. Babies are not exactly known for their quietness, and Kronos might have noticed if he heard a divine infant crying across the cosmos. Enter the Curetes, a band of armored dancers who lived nearby. Whenever Zeus cried, they clashed their shields and spears together, stomping and shouting in rhythm. The noise masked his wails, so Kronos couldn't hear. Essentially, they invented heavy metal percussion thousands of years before the first drum kit. Imagine a baby screaming, and instead of a lullaby, a dozen warriors break into a noisy war dance. Somehow, it worked. Growing up, Zeus didn't just lie around waiting for destiny to call. He learned, he trained, he watched. Unlike Kronos, who ruled through fear and paranoia, Zeus was raised with a sense of community. His caretakers, the nymphs and spirits of nature, taught him about the world. They showed him the forests, the rivers, the mountains. He learned that power wasn't just about brute strength, it was about wisdom, timing, and knowing when to act. By the time he was old enough to understand his situation, he already knew about the prophecy. He knew his siblings were trapped inside his father, and he knew his job would be to rescue them. That kind of pressure would probably crush most people, but Zeus grew up with a quiet determination. Now, if you imagine young Zeus, don't picture him as a moody teenager brooding in a cave. Greek myths like to fast-forward divine childhoods. By the time Zeus could stand, he was already powerful. By the time he could speak, he was clever with words. By the time he grew into a young man, he had the strength and confidence of a leader. Some stories even say that Gaia herself, Mother Earth, gave him special training. She whispered to him about the past, about Uranus, about Kronos, and about the cycle of rebellion. She reminded him that power must always change hands, and that he would be the one to restore balance. It was like having the ultimate grandmother as a life coach. Meanwhile, Rhea kept her distance, but always watched from afar. She couldn't openly visit her son, but she knew he was safe. In her heart, she held on to the hope that one day her children would all be reunited. That thought kept her going, even as she lived under Kronos' oppressive rule. And Kronos, he was none the wiser. The rock he swallowed still sat in his belly, and he thought he had cheated fate. He ruled the cosmos confidently, blind to the storm that was brewing right under his nose. That's the thing about Greek mythology. The gods rarely see their downfall coming, even when it's literally written in the stars. As Zeus grew, he also began to gather allies. The nymphs who cared for him, the Curetes who protected him, even the spirits of the land in Crete, all of them were bound to him by loyalty and affection. Unlike his father, who ruled with fear, Zeus inspired devotion. People believed in him. That difference would later become one of his greatest strengths. Eventually, Zeus was no longer a child hiding in a cave. He became a young man, bold, clever, and ready to face his destiny. The time for waiting was almost over, but there was still one major problem. How exactly do you fight your father when your siblings are all trapped inside his stomach? You can't exactly storm the palace alone. Zeus needed a plan. He needed a way to free his brothers and sisters before he could even think about challenging Kronos. That's where Metis comes in. Metis was a goddess of wisdom, cleverness, and cunning plans. She would later become important in other myths, but for Zeus, she was his secret weapon. Together, they schemed about how to make Kronos release the children he had swallowed. The plan they came up with was simple but genius: trick Kronos into drinking a special potion that would make him vomit. Yes, the mighty Titan King, brought down by a cosmic case of food poisoning. Sometimes mythology is epic, sometimes it's just a little gross. By the end of his youth, Zeus wasn't just a hidden child anymore. He was a strategist, a leader, a future king. He had allies, he had confidence, and he had a plan. From the moment Rhea hid him away in that Cretan cave, fate had been moving toward this point. Zeus was ready to step into the world, to face his father, and to set free the siblings who had been trapped since birth. The stage was set. Kronos thought he had beaten the prophecy, but the real challenge was just around the corner. And Zeus, he was done hiding. So, as we wrap up this chapter, picture young Zeus standing at the mouth of his cave. No longer a baby, but a full-grown god. The mountains of Crete behind him, the wide world before him, and destiny tugging at his sleeve. The days of waiting in the shadows were over. The time for rebellion was coming. In the next chapter, we'll see how Zeus made his move, how he confronted Kronos, freed his siblings, and set in motion the greatest war the cosmos had ever seen. Zeus confronts Kronos. When Zeus finally stepped out of his cave on Crete, he wasn't just a hidden child anymore. He was tall, strong, clever, and ready to take on destiny. But, as anyone who's ever tried to argue with their dad knows, confronting your father is complicated, especially when your father is a titan who eats his own children. That's not exactly the kind of guy you want to surprise at the dinner table. Still, Zeus knew he couldn't wait forever. His brothers and sisters were trapped inside Kronos' belly, and every day that passed was another day of their imprisonment. So he decided it was time to act. But first, he needed help, and that's where Metis, the goddess of cunning, came in. Metis wasn't flashy like some of the other gods. She didn't throw thunderbolts or shake the earth. Her specialty was brains. She could outthink anyone, and she knew exactly how to twist a situation so it worked in her favor. Zeus may have had raw power, but without Metis, he wouldn't have stood a chance. The two of them sat together and came up with a plan. It didn't involve swords, battles, or epic duels. Nope. The plan was much simpler. Make Kronos throw up. That's right. The king of the cosmos was about to be undone by a carefully mixed drink. Metis brewed a special potion, part magic, part trickery, and maybe part stomach acid, and handed it to Zeus. All he had to do was get Kronos to swallow it. And considering Kronos had swallowed 5 children and a rock without asking questions, this part wasn't too hard. Zeus disguised himself and approached his father as a cupbearer, offering the potion as if it were a normal drink. Kronos, lounging like a satisfied tyrant, didn't suspect a thing. He raised the cup, downed the liquid, and smiled. For a moment, nothing happened. He probably thought it was just another fine vintage. Then his stomach started to rumble, loudly. Imagine the mightiest titan in the universe suddenly clutching his belly like someone who just ate bad seafood. Kronos groaned, doubled over. And then it happened. He vomited. Out came not just the rock he had swallowed years ago, but also the 5 children he had eaten: Hestia, Demeter, Hera, Hades, and Poseidon. They spilled out, fully grown and ready for action. Apparently, being stuck in Kronos' stomach was less like digestion and more like divine timeout. Just like that, Zeus had his family back. One moment he was the only free sibling, and the next he had a whole squad. They were disoriented. Of course, being vomited up after years in darkness would do that to you, but they were alive. And more importantly, they were furious. For the first time since their births, the children of Kronos stood together. 6 siblings, united by anger, justice, and the desire for revenge. It wasn't just a family reunion, it was the birth of a rebellion. Kronos, meanwhile, wasn't thrilled about the whole situation. One second he was sipping his drink, the next his kids were glaring at him with murder in their eyes. To be fair, he had literally tried to erase them from existence. He knew immediately that the prophecy was catching up to him. The very children he had swallowed were now standing in front of him, and leading them was Zeus, the son he thought he had destroyed. But Kronos wasn't about to give up. Titans didn't just roll over and accept fate. He summoned his strength, called upon his Titan allies, and prepared for war. This was no longer just a family drama. It was the beginning of the Titanomachi, the greatest battle the cosmos had ever seen. Before we jump into the war itself, though, let's pause and think about the family dynamics here. Kronos tried to outsmart destiny by swallowing his children. Rhea tried to protect her children by tricking her husband. Zeus tricked his father right back with a spiked drink. It's like one giant cosmic prank war, except instead of whoopee cushions, the stakes are control of the universe, Now that Zeus had his siblings back, the Olympians started organizing themselves. Each one brought something important to the table. Hestia, the eldest, was calm and steady. She represented the hearth and home, giving the group a sense of unity. Demeter had ties to the harvest and growth, which meant she understood patience and cycles important for planning a long fight. Hera, strong-willed and sharp, had the fire of leadership in her. Hades, grim and thoughtful, understood darkness and endurance. Poseidon, wild and powerful, carried the force of the sea within him. And of course, Zeus, armed with charm, confidence, and raw ambition, stood at the center. Together, they were a formidable team. For the first time, Kronos had a true challenge, would spread quickly. The other gods, spirits, and creatures of the world began choosing sides. Some still followed the Titans, loyal out of fear or tradition. Others began to look at Zeus and his siblings and thought, maybe these young gods have a point. The lines were drawn. The stage was set. The family drama had grown into a cosmic civil war. But here is the funny thing about Zeus' confrontation with Kronos. It wasn't a dramatic sword fight or lightning battle, not at first. It was trickery, wit, a poison drink. The mighty Titan king was brought to his knees not by strength, but by cleverness. That's a theme you'll see a lot in Greek mythology. Brains often beat brawn, at least in the opening moves. By the end of this chapter, Zeus had achieved something incredible. He had freed his siblings, stood up to his father, and lit the first spark of rebellion. But victory was far from guaranteed. Kronos still had the Titans, ancient beings of enormous strength, and the universe wasn't going to change hands without a fight. The next step wouldn't be subtle. No more sneaky drinks or disguises. What was coming next was a war that would shake the foundations of the world, the Titanimachi. The 10-year battle for control of the cosmos. So, picture it now. The Olympian siblings standing together for the first time, finally free. Kronos, wiping his mouth, furious and humiliated. The Titans gathering their forces. The world itself holding its breath. The trick was done. The children were free. And the greatest war of mythology was about to begin. The Titanimachi begins so. Kronos had just puked up all of his children, and needless to say, the family dinner table was going to be awkward forever. Zeus and his siblings were free, and instead of hugging their dad and saying, "No worries, water under the bridge," they immediately started sharpening their metaphorical swords. This was the spark that lit the fire of the Titanomachia, cosmic war between the old gods, the Titans, and the new generation, the Olympians. Think of it as the ultimate generation gap. On one side, you've got Kronos and his squad of powerful but grumpy Titans. On the other, Zeus and his siblings, young, ambitious, and ready to prove themselves. The universe was the prize, and neither side wanted to back down. The war lines are drawn. Kronos, of course, wasn't going to let his rebellious children take over without a fight. He gathered the Titans, his brothers and allies, and prepared for battle. Titans like Iapetus, Hyperion, and Zeus stood tall beside him. These weren't just any fighters. They were cosmic forces, ancient and immense, each one representing some fundamental part of existence. Meanwhile, Zeus and his siblings didn't exactly have an army yet. They had themselves, their wits, and a lot of pent-up anger from being swallowed alive. Not exactly a balanced fight. If this were a video game, the Olympians would have been the underleveled newbies facing a group of maxed-out bosses. But Zeus had something the Titans didn't: ambition. He was clever, he was bold, and he wasn't afraid to bend the rules. He also had his eye on some potential allies who had been overlooked or locked away for centuries. Mount Arthris versus Mount Olympus. Both sides needed a headquarters. Kronos and the Titans set up camp on Mount Arthris, their great stronghold in central Greece. Imagine a massive fortress built into the side of a mountain, buzzing with Titan energy. It was imposing, ancient, and very don't mess with us. Zeus and his siblings, on the other hand, made their base on Mount Olympus. At first, Olympus wasn't the luxurious divine palace we think of today. It was just a mountain, cold, rocky, and windswept. But it gave them a home base, and more importantly, a symbol. Olympus would become the seat of their power. And even in these early days, it stood for something new. So now the world had two mountains staring each other down. Arthris for the Titans, Olympus for the gods to be. The war wasn't just about fighting, it was about ideas. Old power versus new. Tradition versus change. Control versus freedom. The first clashes, the Titanomachy, didn't start with one giant, world-shaking battle. It began with smaller skirmishes, raids, ambushes, and contests of strength. The Olympians tested their power, learning what they could do, while the Titans flexed their ancient muscles and reminded everyone why they had ruled for so long. Zeus tried out his new thunderbolt for the first time, hurling it down from the skies with a crash that split mountains. Poseidon unleashed massive waves that smashed against Arthris, while Hades cloaked whole battlefields in shadow. The Olympians were raw, but they were creative, using their gifts in new ways. The Titans fought back with raw power and experience. Hyperion, Titan of the sun, blazed like fire across the battlefield. Iapetus, connected to mortality, cut down opponents with terrifying precision. Zeus, who embodied intellect, tried to outplan Zeus at every turn. It was chaos. The earth shook, the seas roared, and the skies burned. And this was only the beginning. A stalemate, the war dragged on. Days turned into years, years into decades. Neither side could gain a lasting advantage. The Titans were too strong, but the Olympians were too determined to quit. Battles raged across land, sea, and sky, tearing the world apart. Earthquakes, storms, and floods weren't just natural disasters back then, they were side effects of divine warfare. For humans, who were still in their earliest forms, the Titanomachy must have looked like the end of everything. The sky lit up with fire, mountains crumbled, oceans boiled. It was like living through 10 straight years of the loudest, scariest fireworks show. Imagine, the Olympians needed help. They were holding their own, but they couldn't win. Not yet. Zeus' big idea, this is where Zeus' leadership really started to show. He realized that the Titans had a weakness, pride. They thought they had already won just by being Titans, and they didn't bother with allies who weren't on their level. Zeus decided to take the opposite approach. He reached out to beings who had been forgotten or locked away. Deep in the bowels of Tartarus, the prison of the underworld, the Cyclopes and the Hecatonchias, the hundred-handed ones, were trapped. Kronos had thrown them there ages ago, afraid of their power. The Cyclopes were master smiths, and the Hecatonchias were, well, giants with 100 hands each. Not exactly the kind of soldiers you want fighting against you. Zeus saw their potential and began plotting a jailbreak. But that's a story for the next chapter. For now, what matters is this. The war had reached a stalemate, and Zeus was about to tip the balance. War as a family drama. It's worth pausing here to notice how much of this war was just family drama turned up to 11. Kronos versus his kids. Brothers and sisters fighting on opposite sides. Cousins clashing in battle. It wasn't just about power, it was about resentment, betrayal, and destiny. Greek mythology loved this kind of theme. The idea that no matter how powerful you are, family conflict can tear you apart. Even gods weren't safe from it. The stage is set by the end of the first phase of the Titanomachy. The world was scarred and shaken. Olympus stood firm, Arthris still loomed, and neither side had one. But Zeus had an idea, and once he set it in motion, the war would never be the same again. The Olympians were learning, adapting, and growing stronger. The Titans were holding their ground, but growing weary, and the world itself was starting to show the strain of their endless battles. The Titanomachy had begun, but the real turning point was yet to come. So, picture it now. To mountains facing off, lightning crackling in the skies, waves smashing against the shores, the ground trembling with every step of divine beings. On one side, the ancient Titans. On the other, the young Olympians. The ultimate cosmic war had begun, and neither side was ready to back down. The next move would decide everything, and Zeus was about to make it. Zeus frees the Cyclopes and the 100-handed ones. The Titanomachy was raging, but after years of thunderbolts, earthquakes, and general chaos, the Olympians and Titans had reached a standstill. Neither side was able to deliver a knockout blow. The Titans had raw strength and experience. The Olympians had youth and creativity, but it wasn't enough. That's when Zeus remembered something important. Somewhere deep below the earth, in the black pit of Tartarus, there were potential allies just waiting to be freed. Allies who had been locked away for ages. Thanks to Kronos' paranoia, it was time for Zeus to play his trump card. Kronos' dirty secret long before the Titanomachy began. Kronos had feared certain beings so much that he threw them into Tartarus. Not humans, not monsters, but his own siblings. Talk about trust issues. The first were the Cyclopes. These were the original one-eyed giants, not the later shepherd types you might know from Odysseus' story. These Cyclopes were legendary craftsmen, master forgers who could make weapons and tools beyond imagination. They had helped shape the cosmos itself, but Kronos locked them away, worried they were too powerful. The second group were the Hecatonkaios, also known as the 100-handed ones. And yes, the name is pretty accurate. Each of them had 100 arms and 50 heads. Imagine trying to find a shirt that fits. They were massive, terrifying, and unstoppable in battle. Naturally, Kronos decided the safest place for them was prison. For centuries they sat in Tartarus, chained up in darkness, until Zeus came knocking. Zeus' journey to Tartarus, getting to Tartarus wasn't easy. It wasn't just a deep hole in the ground, it was the pit, the cosmic dungeon at the bottom of existence. To get there, Zeus had to cross vast chasms, descend through the underworld, and face countless barriers. Most mortals wouldn't have survived the trip. But Zeus wasn't a mortal. With lightning in his hands and determination in his heart, he descended into the shadows. This wasn't just bravery, it was strategy. Zeus knew the Olympians couldn't win the war alone. Down in the depths, the darkness was heavy and suffocating. Chains clanked in the distance, and the air smelled like iron and ash. And then Zeus saw them, the Cyclopes, their single eyes glowing faintly in the dark, and the Hecatonkaios, their massive forms hunched and bound. The bargain, the Cyclopes and Hecatonkaios looked at Zeus with suspicion. They had been betrayed before, locked up by their own family. Why should they trust this upstart god? Zeus made them a promise, freedom in exchange for loyalty. If they sided with him, he would not only release them from Tartarus, but also honor them as allies, not tools. Unlike Kronos, he wouldn't cast them aside once they had served their purpose. The Cyclopes agreed. They had no love for Kronos, who had chained them away, and besides, they liked the idea of forging weapons again. The Hecatonkaios also agreed. They were eager for revenge, and excited to stretch their 100 arms in battle. It was a deal. Zeus broke their chains, and with a flash of lightning, the prison doors burst open. The gifts of the Cyclopes once free, the Cyclopes immediately went to work. They weren't just grateful, they wanted to equip their new allies with the ultimate weapons. Each Olympian got a special gift, crafted with divine skill. For Zeus, they made the thunderbolt, not just any lightning bolt, but the most powerful weapon in the cosmos. With it, Zeus could strike down anything with blinding speed and fiery destruction. For Poseidon, they made the trident, a three-pronged spear that could shake the seas, split the earth, and summon storms. It was the ultimate weapon for the Lord of the Ocean. For Hades, they made the Helm of Darkness, also called the Cap of Invisibility. With it, Hades could vanish completely, moving unseen through the world, perfect for ambushes and strategy. These weren't just cool accessories, they were game changers. With them, the Olympians suddenly had weapons that matched or even surpassed the Titans' ancient powers. The Hecatonkaios, living war machines. Then came the Hecatonkaios. If the Cyclopes were the blacksmiths, the 100-handed ones were the ultimate shock troops. Each one could hurl 100 boulders at once, swing 100 weapons, or crush enemies with sheer size. Their 50 heads gave them unmatched awareness in battle. Imagine being a Titan, standing tall and proud, only to have a mountain hurled at you by a giant with 100 arms. That was the kind of chaos they brought to the battlefield. With the Hecatonchires on their side, the Olympians suddenly had an army. Not just an army, the army. The balance shifts when Zeus returned to Olympus with his new allies. Everything changed. The Olympians were no longer the underdogs. They had weapons, they had numbers, and they had momentum. The Titans were shocked. Kronos had underestimated his children yet again. He had locked away the very beings who could tip the balance of power. And now they were fighting against him. It was a massive blunder. The next time the Olympians marched into battle, thunder shook the skies, waves crashed against the land, and the ground quaked beneath the footsteps of the Hecatonchires. The Titans braced themselves, but the war would never be the same again. A cosmic jailbreak with consequences. Zeus' jailbreak wasn't just a clever move, it was a symbol. It showed that he was willing to do what Kronos never could: trust others, delegate power, and build alliances. That's what made him different, and that's what made him dangerous. But it also raised the stakes. The battles ahead wouldn't just be skirmishes anymore. They would be cataclysmic, world-shaking wars with gods, titans, and giants all clashing at once. The earth would tremble, the heavens would shudder, and nothing would be safe. The Titanomachy was about to enter its most destructive phase. The calm before the storm for a moment. Though there was calm, the Cyclopes were forging, the Hecatonchires were training, and the Olympians were preparing. Zeus had his thunderbolt, Poseidon his trident, Hades his helm. They were armed, ready, and united. The Titans still had numbers, strength, and Arthries as their stronghold. But the Olympians had something new: hope. The stage was set for the next great clash, and this time the Olympians weren't just fighting to survive, they were fighting to win. So, after years of stalemate, Zeus had pulled off the ultimate power move, freeing the most dangerous prisoners in the cosmos and turning them into his greatest allies. It was bold, it was risky, and it was brilliant. The Titans had no idea what was about to hit them. The great battles of the Titanomachy had been brewing for years, but now it was finally turning into a full-blown war. Zeus and his siblings were no longer the scrappy underdogs. They had Cyclopes forging weapons of unimaginable power and hundred-handed giants ready to crush mountains in their fists. The Titans, on the other hand, still had their raw strength, their fortress on Mount Arthries, and their old-school arrogance. The world was about to shake like never before. The battlefield of the gods, the battles of the Titanomachy, weren't fought in some corner of the world, they were fought everywhere. The skies, the seas, the mountains, and even the underworld all became war zones. Imagine thunder cracking across the heavens, while tsunamis rose out of the oceans and mountains cracked open like eggs. The earth itself was the battlefield, and every clash between gods and titans sent shockwaves rippling across existence. Mortals, those poor early humans, just trying to survive, probably thought the end of the world was happening. And honestly, it wasn't far off. Round 1. Chaos in the skies. The first major clashes took place in the skies above Arthries and Olympus. Zeus hurled his brand new thunderbolts, each one blazing like the sun, while Kronos and his Titan brothers fought back with sheer force. Imagine entire mountain ranges being ripped from the ground and tossed like pebbles. That was the level of intensity. The skies were so full of fire and smoke that day, and night basically stopped mattering. Sometimes the battlefield glowed as bright as noon, other times it was dark as midnight. The line between heaven and earth blurred, replaced by storm clouds and flying boulders. Round 2. Poseidon versus Oceanus. While Zeus clashed with Kronos, Poseidon found himself face to face with Oceanus, the titan of the great river that encircled the world. Poseidon wasn't about to let someone else claim dominance over the seas. The battle between them was like a storm on steroids. Waves higher than mountains crashed down, whirlpools swallowed entire coastlines, and the roar of water shook the air. Fishermen, if any dared to go out, probably had the worst day of their lives. In the end, Poseidon's trident gave him the edge. With one strike, he sent tsunamis crashing against Arthries, flooding Titan's strongholds and proving that the seas now belong to him. Round 3. Hades Ghost Stealth. Hades, often the quiet one, wasn't about to stand on the sidelines. With his new helm of darkness, he could slip through the battlefield unseen. While Titans swung boulders and spears, Hades vanished into shadows, sneaking behind enemy lines. He sabotaged supply lines, ambushed Titans when they least expected it, and sowed confusion in their ranks. Every time a Titan turned to strike, Hades was gone, invisible, leaving them panicked and paranoid. The helm made him a master of fear, and for the first time, the Titans felt vulnerable. They realized that brute strength wasn't enough. You can't fight what you can't see. The hecatonkaias unleashed, and then came the real game changers. The 100-handed ones stormed onto the battlefield, their massive bodies shaking the ground. Each one hurled 100 boulders at once, creating avalanches of stone that buried Titan armies. Their 50 heads shouted war cries so loud that even the bravest warriors trembled. The Titans tried to hold their ground. But how do you fight a being that can fight in 100 directions at once? Even the strongest Titans struggled against their sheer force. With every swing, the balance tipped more toward the Olympians. The Titans fight back, but the Titans weren't about to roll over. They unleashed their fury with equal ferocity. Kronos wielded his sickle, slashing through storms of lightning. Hyperion, the Titan of light, clashed with Helios, who was rising in power as one of the younger gods. Zeus hurled knowledge like a weapon, twisting strategies to outmaneuver his foes. For every Olympian victory, the Titans struck back just as hard. The war became a brutal stalemate, one side gaining ground, only to lose it the next day. Mountains rose and fell, rivers changed course, and forests burnt ash. The very shape of the world was rewritten in these clashes. 10 years of war. The Titanomachy wasn't a quick war. It dragged on for 10 whole years. 10 years of storms, earthquakes, floods, and fire. 10 years of endless fighting with no clear winner. The Olympians grew tired, but so did the Titans. The world itself groaned under the strain. Some myths even suggest that the sun and moon stopped their steady paths in the sky, unable to shine properly, while the gods tore reality apart. Every creature on earth, from the smallest insect to the largest beast, felt the impact of this war. It wasn't just a battle between two families. It was the cosmic civil war that determined the future of everything. Zeus takes command through it all. Zeus proved himself as more than just another fighter. He became a true leader. He rallied his siblings, boosted morale, and kept alliances strong. Unlike Kronos, who ruled with fear and paranoia, Zeus built loyalty. He knew when to strike, when to retreat, and when to unleash his allies. His strategy was simple: use the Titans' arrogance against them. Every time they underestimated the Olympians, he turned it into an advantage. And slowly, but surely, the tide began to turn. The earth trembles. The final years of the war saw destruction on a scale no one could have imagined. Entire regions were blasted apart, rivers boiled, volcanoes erupted, and the ground split into yawning chasms. The noise of battle echoed through the cosmos, so loud it was said even primordial gods like Nyx, Night, and Chaos stirred uneasily. The war wasn't just reshaping Greece, it was reshaping the entire world. A clash beyond time. The Titanomachy wasn't just another mythic war. It was the defining conflict between old and new, between tradition and change. The Titans represented the raw forces of the cosmos, powerful, ancient, and stubborn. The Olympians represented progress, adaptation, and a willingness to work together. In every thunderbolt, every wave, every swing of 100 arms, that struggle played out. And after 10 long years, the Olympians finally had the momentum they needed. The Titans were powerful, but the Olympians were smarter, and that, in the end, would make all the difference. For now, the war raged on, but the cracks were showing. The Titans were faltering, and Zeus was ready to make his move. The final battles were near, and soon the world would learn who would rule the cosmos. The fall of the Titans, after 10 long years of chaos, destruction, and more lightning than a July thunderstorm. The Titanimachi was nearing its end. Both sides had fought with everything they had. Mountains had been ripped apart, oceans boiled, and forests burned. But the Olympians were finally starting to pull ahead. The Titans, mighty as they were, had grown weary, while Zeus and his siblings were hungrier than ever for a victory. The fall of the Titans wasn't a single battle. It was a series of crushing defeats that finally broke the old rulers of the cosmos. Kronos versus Zeus, father against son, the showdown everyone had been waiting for was finally here. Zeus and Kronos, father and son, king against challenger, faced off in a battle that would decide the fate of the universe. Kronos fought with his sickle, the same weapon he had once used to overthrow his own father, Uranus. It was a blade sharp enough to slice through time itself. He swung it with the rage of an old king desperate to cling to power. But Zeus wasn't the same uncertain god who had started this war. Armed with his thunderbolts and the confidence of a leader who had survived 10 years of war, he met Kronos head-on. Their clash shook the skies. Each strike of Kronos' sickle split the air with blinding force, while every thunderbolt from Zeus lit up the battlefield like 1,000 suns. The other gods and titans could do nothing but watch as the two powers tore reality apart in their struggle. In the end, Zeus' thunderbolts proved stronger. With one final blast that scorched the heavens, he knocked Kronos down. The old king fell, defeated, his sickle shattered. The throne of the cosmos was no longer his. The titans collapsed with Kronos beaten. The rest of the titans began to falter, one by one. They fell to the combined strength of the Olympians and their allies. Hyperion, titan of light, was blinded by the blazing brilliance of Helios and Apollo, the rising gods of the sun. Iapetus, father of Prometheus and Atlas, was struck down by 100 boulders hurled by the hecatonkaias. Zeus and Crius were overwhelmed by waves of lightning, shadow, and brute force, their strategies useless against the relentless Olympians. Even mighty Oceanus, who had once battled Poseidon for control of the seas, surrendered and pulled back into the far reaches of the world river. The Olympians had broken the Titans' lines, and their power was collapsing like a crumbling fortress. Atlas burdened not all Titans went down quietly. Atlas, son of Iapetus, fought with unmatched fury. Tall as a mountain and strong enough to carry the world on his shoulders, he became the last great hope for the Titan cause. He stood on the battlefield like a living wall, holding back the Olympians with sheer might. His blows shook even the 100-handed ones. For a moment, it looked like Atlas might single-handedly turn the tide. But even Atlas couldn't withstand the combined force of Zeus and his allies. After an exhausting clash, he was finally brought down. As punishment, Zeus condemned him to bear the weight of the heavens for all eternity. That's why, in Greek myth, Atlas is always depicted carrying the sky or sometimes the earth on his back. It was a burden that would never end, a living reminder of the Titans' defeat. The betrayal of Prometheus in the middle of all this. One Titan made a choice that shaped the future. Prometheus, son of Iapetus, decided to side with the Olympians. He saw that the Titans were doomed, and more importantly, he believed Zeus' rule would be better for the world. Prometheus was clever, always thinking ahead. By betraying the Titans, he not only helped secure the Olympians' victory, but also earned himself a place, at least temporarily, in Zeus' favor. Of course, their friendship wouldn't last forever. Prometheus had a habit of annoying Zeus later on, but during the Titanimachi, his defection was a turning point. The final push, the last days of the war were brutal. The Olympians gave everything they had, unleashing storms, earthquakes, and floods. The 100-handed ones buried Titan armies beneath avalanches of stone. The Cyclopes hurled weapons of fire and destruction, their forges still blazing from years of work. The Titans fought back with whatever strength remained, but they were no longer united. With Kronos defeated and Atlas subdued, their war was broken. Finally, Zeus called for the finishing strike. Together with his siblings, he launched an assault on Mount Arthries, the Titan stronghold. The mountain shook as Olympians stormed its halls, lightning and fire tearing through its defenses. The Titans who remained inside were forced out, dragged into the open, and defeated one by one. Mount Arthurs, once the proud seat of the Titans' power, was left in ruins. Olympus now stood as the new center of the cosmos. Chains of defeat, but defeat wasn't the end for the Titans. Zeus and the Olympians knew they couldn't risk letting their enemies rise again, so they called upon the 100-handed ones, their massive allies, to bind the Titans in unbreakable chains. The defeated Titans were dragged down into the deepest pit of the underworld, Tartarus. It wasn't just a dark cave, it was a chasm so deep and terrible that even the gods feared it. The 100-handed ones became their jailers, standing guard to make sure the Titans would never escape. It was a cruel fate, but also fitting. The Titans who had once ruled the cosmos now sat in the darkest prison imaginable, chained and forgotten. A new era begins with the Titans fallen. The age of the Olympians had finally arrived. Zeus stood as king, his brothers Poseidon and Hades beside him, his sisters Hera, Demeter, and Hestia supporting the new order. The world was theirs to shape, and the chaos of the Titanimachi was finally over. But victory didn't mean peace. Even as the Olympians celebrated, the earth still trembled from the scars of war. Rivers had changed, mountains had fallen, and the skies were still heavy with storm clouds. The world was battered and bruised, and rebuilding would take time. Still, there was no doubt. The old order was gone. The Titans had fallen, and a new era had begun. The Olympians had won. But in Greek myth, victory never comes without consequences. The Titans might have been locked away, but the story wasn't finished. In fact, some of the most dangerous challenges to Zeus' rule was still waiting to appear. The imprisonment of the Titans in Tartarus. The war was over. Zeus and the Olympians had won. The earth was quiet for the first time in 10 years. Though quiet is a bit relative when you've just had mountains thrown around like dodgeballs and oceans boiling like soup. Still, compared to the chaos of the Titanimachi, the silence that followed felt almost eerie. But the story didn't end with the fall of the Titans. Defeating them on the battlefield was only half the job. Zeus knew that if he simply let them go, or even allowed them to remain free, they might regroup and rise again. The Olympians couldn't risk that. To build their new order, they had to make sure the old ones stayed buried. And that's where Tartarus comes in. What even is Tartarus? So, let's talk about Tartarus. It wasn't just some dungeon in the basement of Hades' kingdom. It was much, much worse. Tartarus was a cosmic pit of darkness older than the gods themselves. In Hesiod's Theogony, it's described as lying as far below the earth as the earth is from the heavens. To give you an idea, imagine dropping a bronze anvil from the sky. It would take 9 days to fall before it hit the ground. Now imagine dropping that same anvil again, but this time from earth down into Tartarus. Another 9 days of falling. That's how deep this prison was. It wasn't just a hole in the ground, it was almost a separate dimension. The air was heavy, the darkness was endless, and the walls were made of shadow and fire. Basically, the worst Airbnb you could possibly book. The chains of the Titans, the Olympians weren't taking any chances. They called upon the 100-handed ones, their enormous, 50-headed, 100-armed allies to act as jailers. After all, who better to guard a prison than 3 giants strong enough to hurl mountains like pebbles? The defeated Titans were dragged in chains to Tartarus. These weren't ordinary chains, either. They were forged by the Cyclopes, the divine smiths who had armed Zeus with his thunderbolts. These shackles were said to be unbreakable, infused with the raw power of the cosmos. One by one, the Titans were bound. Kronos, once the king of the cosmos, chained and cast into the pit, his sickle broken, his reign over forever. Hyperion, titan of light, left in endless darkness. Iapetus, father of Prometheus and Atlas, locked away, powerless to save his children. Zeus, Crius, and the rest, stripped of their strength, silenced in eternal gloom. The 100-handed ones stood watch at the gates, making sure no escape was possible. The atmosphere in Tartarus. So, what was it like down there? Imagine a place where there's no sunlight, no moonlight, not even starlight, just an endless black void. The ground was said to be made of iron, the walls of bronze, and the air so thick with mist that even gods felt suffocated. There were no songs, no laughter, no stories, just silence, broken only by the clinking of chains and the distant growls of monsters. Tartarus wasn't just a prison, it was despair made real. And here is the kicker. Time itself seemed to stretch down there. A moment could feel like a year like a century. For the Titans, immortals who couldn't die, that meant their punishment was truly eternal. No escape, no ending, no chance for redemption, just endless, crushing darkness. The guard dogs of the underworld now. Zeus didn't stop with chains and guards. He also stationed terrifying monsters to keep watch. Some versions of the myth say that serpents, dragons, or shadowy spirits lurked at the edges of Tartarus, ready to devour anything that tried to climb out. But the main guardians were the 100-handed ones, Briareus, Cossus, and Gyges. After spending years locked away by Uranus, and then freed by Zeus, they had no love for the Titans. They guarded their prison with brutal efficiency, hurling boulders or crushing escape attempts with their 100 fists. If the Titans had once thought themselves untouchable, they now lived every day reminded of their powerlessness. Why not kill them? You might be wondering, why didn't Zeus just kill the Titans? Wouldn't that have been simpler? Well, in Greek mythology, killing an immortal doesn't really work. They don't just vanish when you stab them or blast them with lightning. They're eternal beings. So instead of ending them, the gods had to neutralize them. Tartarus was the solution. It didn't destroy the Titans, it contained them. This also fits with a broader theme in Greek myths, the idea that power can be overthrown, but not truly erased. Uranus was overthrown, but not destroyed. Kronos was defeated, but not obliterated. The Titans weren't wiped out, they were locked away, lurking in the background of myth like a ticking time bomb. The weight of defeat for the Titans. This punishment wasn't just physical, it was humiliating. These were beings who had once ruled the cosmos. Kronos had been king of all creation. Hyperion had blazed across the sky. Oceanus had circled the world. And now they sat in chains, reduced to prisoners in a pit, so deep no mortal eye could ever glimpse them. The shame of their defeat weighed heavier than their shackles. They had lost not only a war, but also their place in the story of the universe. From now on, they weren't rulers. They were reminders of what happens when the old order refuses to let go. Whispers in the darkness still. Greek myths are never about total silence. Even in Tartarus, the Titans weren't entirely forgotten. Their voices sometimes echoed through the pit, carried up into the world above. Ancient poets spoke of their groans rumbling like distant earthquakes, their anger shaking the earth from below. It was as if the world itself remembered them. Their defeat might have been final, but their presence still haunted the edges of existence. The stage is set by locking the Titans in Tartarus. Zeus and the Olympians secured their reign. The cosmos was theirs to shape, free from the threat of the old gods. Also, they thought, because in Greek mythology, nothing ever stays quiet for long. The Titans might have been trapped, but their children, their curses, and their legacies were still out there. And soon enough, Zeus would find himself facing new challenges, ones even more terrifying than the war he had just won. The chains of Tartarus had sealed the fate of the Titans. But for Zeus, this was just the beginning. Because when you're king of the gods, victory only means you've earned the right to face even bigger problems. The aftermath and legacy of the Titanimachi, the dust had settled. The thunder had faded. The battlefield of the Titanimachi, Linguin's mountains cracked, rivers rerouted, and the air still humming faintly with the echo of Zeus' lightning bolts. For 10 years, the cosmos had been locked in the greatest family feud of all time. And now, at last, it was over. But what happens after the biggest war in the history of creation? Do the victors just sit down, high-five each other, and order pizza? Not quite. The end of the Titanimachi didn't mean peace, it meant transition. A new order had risen, and the world would never be the same again. A broken world. First off, the war had wrecked the place. Imagine 10 years of gods hurling mountains oceans flooding valleys, and fire raining from the sky. The natural order was completely scrambled. Earthquakes tore through the land, rivers changed course, forests burned, and whole landscapes were reshaped. In fact, Greek mythology suggests that much of the Earth's geography, the jagged mountains, the deep seas, even the fertile plains, were scars left behind by this cosmic brawl. The world after the Titanomachy wasn't just restored, it was remade. The fate of the Titans, of course. We already know the main losers, the Titans. Most of them were chained in Tartarus, far below the earth, guarded by the 100-handed ones. But not all of them shared that fate. Oceanus, the Titan of the great river, never fought in the war. He stayed neutral, swimming around the edges of the world like, yeah, I'm not getting involved in this mess. Because of that, he wasn't punished. Prometheus and Epimetheus, sons of Iapetus, had sided with Zeus. They were spared and even honored. Prometheus, especially, would play a massive role later on when he gave fire to humans. Atlas, on the other hand, wasn't so lucky. As punishment for his role in leading the Titans, he was forced to hold up the sky at his shoulders for all eternity. A rough gig with no breaks and no vacation days. So, while Tartarus swallowed most of the old gods, a few managed to carve out new roles in the reshaped cosmos. Dividing the cosmos now that the Olympians had won, they needed to decide who got what. After all, you can't just run the universe without some kind of plan. The three brothers Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades drew lots to divide the world among themselves. Zeus got the sky, the throne of Olympus, and ultimate authority as king of the gods. Poseidon got the seas, the storms, and everything under the waves. Hades got the underworld, the realm of the dead. Earth itself, though, was left in common. All three had some influence over it, but none claimed it outright. This division of the cosmos set the stage for the myths to come, because once you give one brother the skies, one the seas, and one the dead, you know drama is guaranteed. A new cosmic order, the victory of the Olympians, wasn't just about power, it was about a new kind of rule. The Titans represented raw, ancient forces of the cosmos, chaotic, untamed, and often cruel. The Olympians, on the other hand, represented a more structured, human-like order. Zeus ruled with councils, assemblies, and oaths. There was hierarchy, law, and at least in theory justice. That doesn't mean Zeus was a perfect ruler, he definitely wasn't. But the Olympian world was more organized than the Titan one. It was a symbolic shift too. The Titanomachy marked the passing of an older generation of gods and the rise of a younger one. In Greek thought, this mirrored the way human society changes, one generation taking over from another, with all the conflict that comes with it. The echoes of war, but here is the thing, wars don't just end and disappear. They leave marks on people, on places, on memory. The Titanomachy haunted the world even after it was won. Some myths say that earthquakes were caused by the groans of the imprisoned Titans deep in Tartarus. Storms and natural disasters were reminders that the old powers were still there, buried but not gone. The world might have moved on, but it still carried echoes of their rage. Lessons of the Titanomachy. So, what do we take away from all this? Ancient Greeks probably saw the Titanomachy as more than just an action story. It was a way of explaining why the world is the way it is. Mountains and seas, scars of the war, the existence of order and law. Thanks to Zeus overthrowing the chaos of Kronos, natural disasters, whispers of the old powers that still lurk in the shadows. It was also a reminder of a universal theme. Nothing lasts forever. Uranus was overthrown by Kronos. Kronos was overthrown by Zeus. Even Zeus, some myths hinted, might one day be challenged. The Titanomachy wasn't just history, it was part of a cycle. The human angle, one of the most interesting legacies of the Titanomachy, wasn't about gods at all, it was about humans. Because with the Olympians in charge, the stage was finally set for humanity to rise in the myths. Prometheus, the crafty Titan, was allowed to roam free after the war. He's the one who shaped humans from clay and gave them fire. Without Zeus' victory and the new order, there might not have been room for mortals in the first place. So in a way, the Titanomachy isn't just the story of gods, it's the prologue to our own story. From chaos to cosmos, when you zoom out, the Titanomachy is one of those myths that explains everything by explaining chaos. First, there was chaos itself. Then came the Titans, who embodied wild, primal forces. Then came the Olympians, who imposed order, structure, and culture. The war wasn't just a family squabble, it was the universe itself shifting gears. It was how the Greeks imagined the messy process of moving from formless power to the structured world they lived in. A warning for the future: let's not get too comfortable. Greek mythology has this sneaky way of reminding us that no victory is final. The Olympians might have won, but there were always hints that their rule wasn't guaranteed forever. Zeus had already overthrown his father. What's to stop someone from overthrowing him? The Titanomachy ended, but the cycle of power struggles never really stopped. It's almost like the universe itself was built on rebellion and renewal. Closing thoughts: the Titanomachy left the world scarred, reshaped, and reborn. The Titans were locked away, the Olympians crowned as rulers, and humanity's story was about to begin. But deep down in Tartarus, the old gods still stirred, their chains rattling in the dark. And if Greek myths have taught us anything, it's this: nothing stays quiet forever. The rise of the Olympians and the new order, the dust of the Titanomachy, had finally settled. The universe, once ruled by the grim and looming Titans, was now in the hands of a younger and flashier generation, the Olympians. Imagine a workplace takeover where the old managers were all banished to the basement, and the new bosses rolled in with fresh ideas, some questionable policies, and way more drama. That was Mount Olympus. Mount Olympus becomes HQ. The Olympians needed a home base, and they picked Mount Olympus. This was no ordinary mountain. High above the clouds, it was said to be wrapped in eternal sunlight and untouched by storms. Basically, the penthouse suite of the cosmos. Olympus became more than a house, it was a symbol. From here, the gods could look down on the world below and keep an eye on mortals, nymphs, and whatever monsters happened to be wandering around. Think of it as the ultimate corner office, except instead of a water cooler, they had ambrosia and nectar flowing on tap. Zeus, king of the gods, at the center of it all sat Zeus. By drawing lots, he had won the sky and the throne of Olympus. His rule was supposed to be about justice, order, and fairness, but let's be real, Zeus was not exactly the picture of self-control. He could be wise one moment and completely reckless the next. Still, his leadership meant that there was at least some structure. Oaths sworn on the river Styx became binding. Councils of gods were held. Laws began to matter. The Olympian world was more organized than the Titan one, even if it was still messy at times. Hera, queen and partner sort of beside Zeus, stood Hera, his sister and wife. As queen of the gods, she ruled over marriage and family. But let's just say her marriage was less than blissful. Zeus wasn't exactly known for loyalty, and Hera's jealousy would become a running theme in myth after myth. Still, she was powerful. Mortals feared her wrath as much as they honored her blessings. She wasn't just Zeus' partner, she was a force of her own, shaping the moral fabric of Greek society, for better or worse. Poseidon and the seas. Meanwhile, Poseidon ruled the oceans. This wasn't a boring desk job. The sea was wild, unpredictable, and dangerous. Sailors prayed to him before setting out, knowing that one bad mood from Poseidon could mean a shipwreck. He wasn't all storms, though. Poseidon also created horses and was tied to earthquakes. If the ground trembled beneath your feet, you could blame him for stomping around in his watery palace. Hades in the underworld. Then there was Hades, ruler of the underworld. Unlike his brothers, he didn't live on Olympus. Instead, he made his home deep underground, surrounded by rivers of fire, darkness, and the endless flow of souls. Hades wasn't evil, though just strict. He kept the dead where they belonged and maintained balance between life and death. Without him, the world above would have been overrun by restless spirits. His role may have been gloomy, but it was essential. The other Olympians beyond the big three, the rest of the Olympian squad, filled out the roster. Demeter, goddess of agriculture, who made sure crops grew and people didn't starve. Hestia, goddess of the hearth, who kept the flame of home and family alive. Athena, goddess of wisdom and strategy, born from Zeus' head fully armed. Apollo, god of the sun, music, and prophecy, a bit of a jack of all trades. Artemis, goddess of the hunt and the moon, who roamed the wilds. Ares, god of war, not strategy, just the chaotic blood and guts of battle. Hephaestus, god of fire and craftsmanship, who forged weapons and wonders. Aphrodite, goddess of love and beauty, whose charms could topple even the strongest wills. Hermes, the speedy messenger, trickster, and guide of souls. Each Olympian had their realm, their quirks, and their stories. Together, they formed a pantheon that felt strangely human, full of love, jealousy, mistakes, and rivalries. A new order. What made the Olympians different from the Titans wasn't just their victory, it was their approach to power. The Titans had ruled through raw force and fear. The Olympians, while not perfect, brought law, ritual, and order. Zeus and his siblings swore oaths, held councils, and even allowed debate. Sure, they didn't always follow their own rules, but the point was that rules existed at all. For mortals looking up, the Olympians looked less like distant forces of nature and more like a family of larger-than-life rulers who shaped the world with both wisdom and folly. The role of mortals, this new order also left space for humans to step onto the stage. The Olympians took an interest in humanity in a way the Titans never did. Mortals prayed, sacrificed, and built temples, hoping for favor or fearing punishment. The gods could be generous, but they could also be terrifyingly petty. A broken oath or a missed sacrifice might mean drought, plague, or a thunderbolt to the head. But despite the danger, humans were part of the picture now, woven into the cosmic fabric under the Olympians' gaze. Culture and symbolism to the ancient Greeks, this shift was more than myth. It mirrored their own view of society where law, ritual, and family bonds held things together. The Olympians embodied ideals and flaws alike, teaching lessons through their dramas. The old world of the Titans had been chaos, raw nature, and primal fear. The new world of the Olympians was about balance, culture, and most importantly storytelling. Every temple, every festival, every prayer was tied back to the drama of these gods on their mountain top. A family of drama, but let's not romanticize it too much. The Olympians weren't a perfect team. They argued, plotted against each other, and sometimes even rebelled against Zeus himself. Their family drama became the foundation of countless myths. In other words, the new order wasn't peaceful, it was just entertainingly messy. Closing thoughts. The rise of the Olympians was the dawn of a new cosmic age. From Mount Olympus, Zeus and his siblings ruled with law, ritual, and let's be honest, lots of chaos anyway. But compared to the Titans, they represented a more human, more relatable world. They had flaws, passions, and rivalries, and in those flaws, mortals could see a reflection of themselves. The Titanimachi may have ended the age of the Titans, but the rise of the Olympians created a new stage, one filled with gods who were just as unpredictable as the humans who worshipped them. The new order had begun, but lurking beneath it all, old grudges and ancient power still stirred. Because in Greek mythology, peace never lasts for long. Echoes of the Titans, lasting influence on myth and culture. The Titans may have been defeated and locked away in Tartarus, but their story didn't just vanish. In fact, the memory of the Titans lived on, echoing through Greek myth, culture, and even into modern times. Like a band that broke up after a disastrous tour, but whose songs still get played on the radio, the Titans remained part of the soundtrack of human imagination. The memory of the old gods. For the Greeks, the Titans weren't just villains in a cosmic war. They were symbols of the raw, untamed forces of nature. Oceanus, the endless waters; Hyperion, the shining sun; Cronus, the devouring father of time. Even when locked away, their presence lingered. Every sunrise, every storm, every earthquake, people could see reminders of that ancient age. The Olympians might have taken over, but the Titans represented something older, wilder, and impossible to forget. The generational lesson, one of the biggest takeaways from the Titan story, was the idea of generational conflict. Uranus was overthrown by Cronus. Cronus was overthrown by Zeus. Each generation rose, toppled the old order, and set up something new. This wasn't just mythology, it reflected how the Greeks saw life itself. Sons and daughters eventually replace their parents. Old ways give way to new customs. The Titanimachi became a kind of cosmic family drama that explained why change is both inevitable and painful. Cultural reflection, the myths of the Titans also mirrored human struggles. Cronus devouring his children symbolized fear of time, aging, and the cycle of life. Rhea's defiance showed the power of cleverness and resistance against oppression. Prometheus' rebellion highlighted compassion, sacrifice, and the danger of challenging authority. In short, the Titans weren't just characters, they were symbols. They gave shape to human fears, hopes, and lessons that people could carry into daily life. The survival of Prometheus among all the Titans. Prometheus stood out as the one who truly endured. He wasn't just remembered, he became a hero of sorts. By stealing fire for humans, he ensured that the Titan spirit of rebellion lived on. Even though he suffered chained to a rock, his story showed that kindness and sacrifice were stronger than punishment. For the Greeks, Prometheus was proof that not all Titans were monsters. Some were allies, and some left gifts that would never fade. The Titans in worship, while the Olympians got temples, sacrifices, and festivals, the Titans weren't completely ignored. In some regions, small cults honored them, often connected to local traditions or rituals tied to nature. Farmers might remember Cronus during harvest festivals. Sailors might whisper prayers to Oceanus. These weren't big flashy celebrations, but they kept the memory of the Titans alive in daily life. The old gods lingered at the edges of Greek religion, at sunset quiet, but always there. The Titan spirit in art and story. Greek poets and playwrights loved the Titans. Their stories provided drama, tragedy, and grandeur. Hesiod, for example, used them to explain the origins of the cosmos and the shift to the Olympian world. Later, philosophers saw the Titan myths as metaphors. Cronus could be read as time itself, always consuming what it creates. The Titanimachi could symbolize the battle between chaos and order. These interpretations gave the old myths layers of meaning that lasted long after the tales were first told. Influence beyond Greece. The echoes of the Titans didn't stop with the Greeks. When Rome adopted Greek culture, the Titans became part of Roman mythology too. Latin poets like Ovid wove their stories into epic tales. Cronus was reshaped into Saturn, who ended up with his own festival, the Saturnalia, a time of feasting and role reversal that later influenced Christmas traditions. Even today, the Titans live on in language. We use the word Titanic to describe something massive and powerful. Companies, ships, and sports teams borrow the name Titan to sound impressive. The myth has become a permanent part of how we describe strength and scale. Lessons for mortals at the heart of it all. The Titan stories carried lessons from everyday people. They warned about pride, greed, and the dangers of holding on to power too tightly. Cronus' downfall showed that fear and paranoia can destroy even the strongest ruler. Prometheus' suffering reminded people that acts of kindness often come at great cost, but are worth it. These myths weren't bedtime stories just for fun, they were ways of teaching. They offered guidance, warnings, and reflections on what it meant to be human in a world full of unpredictable forces. A cosmic cycle. Perhaps the most haunting echo of the Titans was the idea that history repeats itself. If Uranus fell to Cronus, and Cronus fell to Zeus, then maybe one day, Zeus too would fall. Some myths hinted at this. Prophecies whispered of future threats, of new gods rising, or of challenges that could shake Olympus itself. The Titan story wasn't just about the past, it was a reminder that nothing lasts forever. Power always shifts, and even gods must face the passage of time. Closing the story so, as the Olympians enjoyed their reign on Mount Olympus, the Titans remained in the background, locked away, but never forgotten. They were the foundation on which the new order was built, the old bones beneath the shining palace of the gods. For the Greeks, remembering the Titans was like remembering where you came from. You might not want to live in the past, but you couldn't ignore it either. The Titans were echoes of a primal age, shaping myths, culture, and imagination for centuries. And even now, thousands of years later, their names still carry weight. The old gods may have fallen, but their stories are still alive, quiet, powerful, and eternal, like the rumble of thunder deep beneath the earth.